Hi, everybody, and welcome to the American Marketing Association New York's Fireside Chat. My name is Karen Cummins. I'm a board member and partnership chair for AMA New York, which thrives in the center of the world's most influential business community, raising the profile of marketing, providing professional development and networking opportunities, and serving as a resource of marketing industry events and news. If you want to learn more about AMA New York, please go to amanewyork.org. Today, you're going to hear from AMA New York's Research Chair, Craig Charney of Charney Research Group, and Petco's Kieran Kennetkar, who are going to discuss the findings for the first time anywhere of a recent study called The Future of Marketing 2021, Did COVID Kill TechLash? Craig is the president of Charney Research and is a market researcher and pollster with 25 years of experience in more than 45 countries. He's an expert in marketing and communication strategy development. Kieran currently works as senior director handling data engineering, BI, and analytics at Petco. He is an accomplished technology executive with 20 plus years of experience that includes success in leadership roles within publicly traded enterprise environments, and he has proven ability to develop corporate strategy and drive execution for digital transformation, cloud migration, data, and analytics. So that said, Craig and Kieran, I'll let you two take it from here.
Thanks for this introduction, Karen. Great to chat with you, Craig, on this very current topic. So let's dive into it. So what is it that you did exactly?
The Future of Marketing study looked at two different populations. We surveyed consumers across the US, and we also surveyed marketers. It was the second time we've done this. The first was in 2019. So we were able to track and see changes over this very important time when the COVID-19 pandemic struck.
Great. So in 2019, your study found a lot of consumer hesitancy about new marketing technologies. What did you see this time? Was there any change compared to the last time?
We found a big change, in fact. Growing consumer acceptance of new marketing has shifted the balance of consumer opinion. It even points to further adoption in homes as well. We saw big jumps after the COVID-19 experience and the big uptick in the use of online purchasing and remittances. Jumps of much as 30 points in favorability for items like smart speakers, and even things that people have been more hesitant about, like AR, like augmented reality or virtual reality, also increased at least 15 to 20 points. So the result is that when we tested a series of marketing technologies, we found that most of them were fairly popular now, which is considerable contrast to the situation 2 years ago. And we also saw an increase in the adoption of technologies. Smart speakers were in a third of homes 2 years ago. Now they're in almost half.
That's great. Yeah, that's what we have seen in our digital business as well at Petco. A lot of consumer habits changed as a result of COVID, as they were kind of forced to adopt digital business, where previously they might have been going to store. Now they're forced to order things online. So a lot of their habits changed. But did people's attitude change because of towards the benefit of Martech because of this?
Yes, I think that they have actually come to see through their experience a much more positive, a much closer acquaintance with the positives of marketing technology. Because we also saw significant increases in the proportion who say shopping is now more fun, shopping is now more enjoyable, shopping is quicker. We're able to find that brands are better informed about what we need and like. So the experience has definitely been a positive one and has driven home with people what the advantages of MarTech are.
Great. But does that mean then that the so-called TechLash is over?
Well, not exactly. What we also found was that Americans are just as aware of the negatives of MarTech as in 2019. We have very large proportions, over 7 in 10, who are fearful that new marketing technology will make ads less interesting, will cost consumers their privacy, will make them feel under constant surveillance, and will permit misinformation to be spread by bots or other sources of false marketing. The result is that the TechLash has not gone away. It remains very sensitive, even though people are using marketing technologies more.
Yeah, that's what I have seen as well at Petco. We are also subject to some of those privacy laws, such as in California, we have the CCPA, or now there is a do not sell information. Those type of laws are definitely out there, which consumers are clearly paying attention to. So,
Yeah.
what did you learn about those privacy concerns and data collection?
Well, what we saw is that the TechLash there too is having an impact. Majorities of consumers, for example, would limit data collection to email, age, and name. And interestingly enough, we found that marketers largely agree as well. The majorities of both would say, for example, that you should not be collecting data on people's sexual orientation or their political partisanship or even their religion. Um,
Yes. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. As a data and analytics executive, my job is really to enable marketers. I want to provide them data-driven insights. So data is definitely at the center of everything in this increasingly digital world. But at the same time, we have the other side where we have to make sure the privacy concerns of the consumers are taken care as well. So are consumers and marketers on the same page about this data collection?
Well, we saw that their views on things like consent for data use show many similarities. In fact, marketers are even more cautious than buyers in some respects. For example, wanting to make sure they have consent for personalization of advertising or offers. Um, but there is one important area where the two are substantially different, and that is sharing data with other firms. We found that almost half of consumers said that should not be done without specific consent, whereas only 1/4 of marketers felt an obligation to do so.
Right. Yeah, I think those personalization is really one key area where I see, as a technology executive, if I have to, let's say, personalize a marketing content for consumers, we definitely need to know certain things about the consumer, right? Otherwise, you can't really personalize. But there is this other side, which what consumer is willing to share as part of that. And then there are many players involved when it comes to advertising and marketing. So then those concerns come into picture. How do we share this data with marketers and advertisers, and how do we make that personalization really effective for everyone?
Yes. Well, this is where the question of consent is very important because consent ultimately is not just a question of transmission of the data, it's a question of respect. The consumer has to feel respected in order to be willing to part with their data.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And how are consumers signaling their dissatisfaction with the data collection?
Well, a lot of them are simply refusing to share their data. One of the interesting surprises was that fully 70% had done one or another thing to prevent the sharing of data, either deleting an app, um, stopping going to a website, dropping the social media, refusing cookies, or refusing explicitly to provide data that's requested. So we're seeing a growing willingness on the part of consumers to say, no, this is too intrusive. We're not going to get that. In fact, one of the other surprises was that so many people are reluctant to part with their data that even if companies offer them money, only about half say they're willing to part with their data. Slightly more than half, in fact, said that they would not even have offered a price.
Got it. And I understand that these days a lot of influencers are also involved in terms of how they influence consumers' behaviors. Have you seen any kind of techlash in terms of how do influencers influence consumers' buying behaviors?
Yes, this has been quite interesting. We found that over 40% of consumers say that they are following at least one influencer. We also asked, how would you feel about the influencers if you knew they were being paid by the companies whose products they endorse or use? And we found that a large majority of those who follow influencers, over 70%, excuse me, over 80%, said they would trust the influencers less. Um, this is an interesting vulnerability. And it also may be an indication where companies involved may either need to disclose these relationships or their competitors may.
Yeah. So why should marketers care about this TechLash, and do they really care about that today?
Well, one of the things that we saw is that there's very strong evidence that firms that violate customer expectations regarding privacy or mislead the consumers are going to be punished in the form of lost sales. People are very specific, for instance, about companies that sold their data without obtaining their consent. Their 70% said that they were less likely to purchase from such firms, and 50% said they were much less likely to do so. Again, this is a vulnerability for firms to trample on people's privacy and an opportunity for their competitive opponents. Similarly, as I was saying, we found that people who feel that their influencers that they've trusted are being bribed or that they've been misled about the influencers are much less likely to listen to them. So I think what we're seeing increasingly is that marketers who don't pay attention to these kinds of issues are going to find that it hurts the bottom line. The result of that, though, is that we do seem to be seeing some response by marketers as well. There's a growing recognition of the importance of obtaining consent, of keeping data collection relatively unobtrusive, and that these affect competitive position. We found that the majority of marketers, in fact, recognize that the respect of consumer privacy can be a competitive advantage, and that trampling on consumer privacy can be an important and painful competitive disadvantage.
That's great. And in terms of demographics, I mean, we do have consumers across multiple demographics, right? Such as Gen Zers, millennials, etc. Have you found any differences in terms of their age? There may be a certain way they react to these events.
Yes, and in fact, again, there have been some interesting surprises here. The youngest of consumers are the under 25s, are called Gen Z. And we found that they're the most privacy sensitive, the most reluctant, in fact, to share their data and the most unwilling. We found greater willingness, in fact, among the millennial generation, those are the 25 to 40s, and the Gen X group, 40 to 55. And then we also found a somewhat lower willingness among the oldest groups, the baby boomers who are over 55, and the few we had from the silent generation who are over 75. So generation ends up being an important factor. When it comes, on the other hand, to MarTech, we found there that education and income are even more important than age. The better educated and higher income consumers tend to be more favorable to marketing technologies as well, as do the young. There's also an interesting and surprising racial component there. Black and Hispanic Americans are more welcoming of marketing technology than are white Americans by 10 to 15 points.
That's great. Those are some great findings. And that is definitely one of the areas where we are also, when we try to do personalization, knowing the demographic of our target customers is really important. So having those demographic data is quite interesting when it comes to marketing technology.
I think what it underlines also is that individual companies are going to have to look at their own individual consumer bases. They'll need to try to figure out what do their consumers feel about privacy, about data sharing, about data collection, about influencers, and so forth. These are things that need to be thought of just as much as, say, what's the right media mix, or what's the most motivating tagline for the ad.
Right. Yeah. So I think we are almost coming up on time. So I had just one last question. See, ultimately, all the consumers, they agree to, or they give their consent through terms and conditions that companies have on their websites and their products. And sometimes those can be confusing. So what are some of your findings in terms of that?
Yes, we found that most of them, 58%, claimed that they had fully read the terms and conditions at least once, where a little bit of suspicion might be justified. But on the other hand, we also found that 60% of them would very much like to have a comprehensible one-page summary of the terms and conditions offered to them regularly by websites. And 36% said they would actually read them often if they did.
That's great. Thanks. That's all the questions I had for you today. It was a great chat. Thank you for all those insights from your study.
Well, thank you. And to the audience, just to conclude, if you want to see the full write-up of this part of the study, look at the AMA New York booth at the Reuters Event Strategic Marketing Conference platform. There's also more to come from this study on purpose, post-COVID marketing, and the future of B2B marketing. Stay tuned and keep an eye on the AMA New York website for these forthcoming installments. Thank you all very much for watching and listening.
Thank you.